Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shootout Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Baxter, and today is episode 53 of the series. If you're new to the podcast is a weekly series where I bring on guests from the film and game industries to talk about their journey and thoughts on student education. The podcast is live on 10 other platforms alongside YouTube. We're on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify. Last but not least, we've got Stitcher. The podcast, is sponsored by the Rookies Award. It's open to young creatives in visual effects, animation, games, virtual reality, motion graphics, and 3D visualization. There's simply no better way to launch your career and start sharing your amazing work online. Make sure to give them a follow and check their amazing site in the description below. However, today we've got an amazing guest returning. We've got our first ever guest who's on the podcast. We have Ryan Locke back on the show. How you doing, Ryan? Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey Ross, no problem. It's really great to hear from you. It's been a long time.
It certainly has. It's just crazy. It's been 52 podcasts since I did this, and you were literally my first guest on the podcast. It's crazy.
Yeah, man, it's you like being busy, don't you? It's great. I was showing somebody very recently just a list of just an incredible list of guests that you've had over the last year and a half, 2 years, and it's just been excellent. So I'm happy to play a small part in that. You know, it's a total honor being on your podcast, man. So thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always good having you on. You have so much knowledge and so much skill, and it just helps, especially getting also like the lecturer perspective as well. And also you're a concept artist as well. You've got so much talent, and like that's the main thing. It's always about like the guests and what you guys offer people, and especially when it comes to student education. And like obviously the whole podcast is based around the students. And before we even get into all the fun bits, everyone, you guys know what to do. So all the thousands of you guys listening around the world, go spam the follow button right now on Ryan's social medias. So he uses Twitter. He also, what other social medias do you use, Ryan? I'm pretty sure you use quite a few, or is it mainly just Twitter as your main kind of go-to?
Yeah, Twitter's definitely my main kind of window to the world when I feel like talking to the world outside of the four walls I usually keep myself in.
Okay.
Other than my a good decent lecture hall or a classroom, but there is an Instagram out there somewhere as well, but it doesn't get updated very often anymore.
Fair enough. Well, everyone, you heard Twitter, so make sure you're giving a follow on Twitter. The Twitter tag will be in the description below. And with that said, let's get into the podcast. So, as always, man, just tell us a wee bit about yourself. Take it away. The show is yours.
All right, then. Where to begin? So, my name's Ryan Locke. I'm a lecturer in media design at Abertay University, and I largely sort of lecture and tutor across the computer arts program, but not strictly limited to. We also have our Masters in Game Development program, and of course, there are other sort of degree programs that you might see me guest appear on. Also, one of my other roles is a program leader in digital learning. So I take a more active role in kind of how digital technologies play a role in how we teach, which is that was actually a more recent promotion, which has been awesome. But also nice. Alongside that as well, I think that was last year. I can't remember. Time's so strange these days, Ross.
You'll get a shock when I was at uni then. It's now 3 years since I've been at uni.
That scares the life out of me. It's just the speed at which all of these things happens just is crazy. And of course, alongside that as well, I like to kind of stay active as well as just in my illustration, concept artwork, and 3D design.
Yep, awesome. So the one thing I always want to ask, we kind of touched on it on the last podcast, but just to let everyone know who's listening, like what got you into kind of teaching, and where did that kind of become a thing? What got you into the role of being a teacher, etc.
Sheer accident.
Oh right, okay, awesome.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I've always enjoyed that part where you're teaching somebody new. It's one of those things you notice like a quality in yourself. Trying to be a little bit humble about things, but it was it never really seen teaching as a career as much as it's just like an option that might happen one day. But how crazy that passion would become didn't really reveal itself until I think at some point, I think during my master's, I was asked if I would cover a class and come and do a guest lecture. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm simply unqualified for this.
Okay.
And they were like, no, we know who you are, and we like that you do take a very deep and active interest at an academic level as well as a practical level on certain subjects. And I was like, oh, okay, then I'll take a swing at it. So it was, it's one of those things. Somebody asks you to do it, and you're like, "That'll be easy." And then, of course, 2 days before it, I'm like, "What have I done to myself?" I know, and I'm like, "How do you write a lecture? How do you give a lecture?" And so one of the things that kind of sparked into my mind at that moment, and it's something that's never really left, is I wanted to be the lecturer that I never had, and that's really important. I want people to kind of remember that because it's super important to kind of think about what your educational experiences have been through your life. And I just wanted somebody that was passionate, excitable. I always say give a toss, but also could look people in the eye and be honest with them, critical when it was required, supportive when it was required, and of course, somebody that can help me build my skill set up. And so I was like, well, okay, that's a good place to start. But it's just one lecture. I should calm myself down a bit here.
Yeah.
But so I went in and gave this lecture, and I was like, I wonder how that went. And the students hung around afterwards, and they were like, that was great. Where's your office? And I went, I don't have an office. But that's when the bug started. And of course, it's about 2.5 years later that I really took this, much more serious and became a full-time lecturer. And it was just a really fun experience. And I started doing little bits and pieces here. I was asked back to deliver a class eventually, which was actually a 3D design and pre-visualization class, which I kind of still run a version of.
Okay.
And it was an addiction straight away. It was hard work, but working directly with people that were so interested in the same sort of things I am, teaching them new things, helping them get past some of the roadblocks they run into was just so rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a skill as well that never ran out of challenges. There was always something different and new. And where I find the job the hardest is when you come across a student who is, extremely capable.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
definitely.
like, okay. So it's like, well, it's not about what I can teach you, it's about how I can challenge you. And that became a very different role. And ever since then, it's like this really complex, it's like a really complex flavor. There's always these little bits that you discover about it that is constantly giving back and lets you give back in different ways. And I think I still get a total buzz from it. And I've been doing this nearly 10 years now.
That's amazing. Because that's the thing. Because that's the reason why I do the podcast, and it's always been my kind of long-term dream is actually one day become like a teacher and stuff. And in the sense that, so everyone who knows the podcast, everyone who's tuning in, you guys know my main sort of passion is Harry Potter, and my addiction to making my reality come true of building Hogwarts in Scotland, and everyone will go to there and actually study art in Scotland. Just so you know, Ryan, if you're more than welcome to be one of the main art teachers there. If you ever want a job in the future, just letting you know.
This
That
is great news.
that is like the plan. So everyone who wants to maybe chip in 1p, just let me know. But that's the thing when it comes to teaching is that obviously the Student Art podcast, obviously I've always brought on so many guests, but a lot of them have been coming from the perspective from the students or former students, etc. And I've had a few teachers on, obviously including Ryan. I've also had Ian MacArthur on, and it's trying to get their perspective and talking about what it's like being a teacher and a lecturer and its challenges and how basically the education is improving. So this is actually I don't know what the best way for you to answer this is, but we'll just go straight in with it. What would you say is actually the hardest thing about being a teacher and being a lecturer?
Hardest thing about being a lecturer and a teacher is probably is making sure that you're always on top of the knowledge of your field as required,
Mm-hmm.
because it's an industry that moves and shifts so quickly. Not only do the skills change, but the technologies change, and of course the knowledge base surrounding that changes too. And I think a little bit different about being a lecturer is that you do have to be, academically aware as much as practically aware. And I kind of branching on from the last question is I've always considered myself an accidental academic, but I stopped using the word academic a while ago because I've always preferred the phrase pracademic, which is something I made up.
Yeah,
Completely, you know
I
what I'm
remember.
like.
I remember.
I make so many words up because I think you're not really, the world has to work for you, and I'm just like, I'm more of a academic. I like doing things, I like making things, but I like doing it in a way that is situated in meaningful and learned ways, So, of course, I find everything about industry interesting, but I also like attaching it to wider knowledge bases and meaning wherever I can find them.
Hmm.
And so, the hardest part about being a lecturer is, bridging what I do and how I view the world and the reading and the practical work that I do, bridging that with, just industrial standards and skills and knowledge bases. And then, of course, the last bridge is building that back in a way that lets students cross that bridge as well. It's, where are your skills? Where do we skill you up? And how can you come over to this side in a way that's also meaningful to them so that they can begin to grow and develop? And there are, of course, two major challenges there, which I'm sure most students might recognize. On one hand, it's about the hard skills. Can you show me how to make this thing? How to click this button? Where's the link? Where is the resource? Where's that drop down menu that you showed us 2 minutes ago?
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, that's all fine. But the other part is its application, which is finding new, interesting, and relevant ways to apply those skills in a way that people can use to build, one, themselves in terms of confidence and skill base, but also, of course, a portfolio that will get them into the industries that they desire. So it's a multifaceted job in all sorts of ways. It comes with, several layers of difficulty. And my way of navigating them tends to be working closely with students in industry as much as I can and as often as I can. And where I do get a break in between the timetabled sessions and classes
Yeah.
is making sure that I'm keeping up to date with, all the different ways other people are working, such as, your podcast is actually a great way of highlighting a knowledge base. You're essentially interviewing these practitioners on a weekly basis about how they work, why they work, and of course what their goals, aspirations, and passions are. And that's a similar thing to an academic position. And I'm afraid to tell you, Ross, well done.
Thank you. I'm doing something. Woo! We're on the
Yeah,
right track.
you're doing a lot of cool things. It's really, really kick-ass. Well done.
It's just well, that's just the thing. I think it comes down to the obviously like me when it came to university. Like I was just saying to Ryan before we even started the podcast that when I was at university, so I went to Abertay, and that's where Ryan teaches. And Abertay was always it was literally home for me, and it always felt like it was like a family, and it just always felt right. And I'm aware that there's obviously so many people who are tuning in right now, and maybe they're in uni right now and they're trying to figure out, am I getting taught the right thing? How far ahead is my maybe teachers and so forth in relation to the industry? Like, are we all up to date? And there's so many questions that we raise as students, and like that was the reason for the podcast. And it was like I wanted to make sure that I could get all the questions. Obviously, some questions I ask is very repetitive, but there's a reason for that, and it's to highlight that, that there's consistent. It's like, well, there's like a consistency, if you know what I mean. And doing the podcast was my way of getting the questions answered for these students around the world and stuff, and hopefully it's helped everyone. And I just love doing it. I simply just love it. Like you'll know yourself, Ryan. Like there's nothing more rewarding than helping someone.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. And it's like, I can't. Oh, if I look at like my colleagues, which are they're all ex-industry staff, and a lot of them are hard academics as well, and you get this incredible knowledge base from an incredible set of people.
Mm-hmm.
But every single one of them that I know tend to they'll always go above and beyond the actual description of the job, the hours that job is meant to take, and of course even the remit of the job as well, because fundamentally we're more interested in helping people get where they're trying to go.
Of course.
And of course, being a university situation, when we see students give back as well, when they're invested, when they're interested, then that encourages us to kind of just do more for them as well, which can sometimes, I guess, for some people feel a little bit unbalanced, but it's just a natural result of people who put the hours in. It's you can visibly see that. You're like, wow, I see you here every day.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to stop by for 10 minutes and catch up with you outside of class time. That stuff really, it affects how people view you and, the sort of work that you're doing.
Yeah. Because like that's the thing. Like when it comes like the whole side of like the teaching and like you being a teacher, like that's one of the questions I actually wanted to raise today in terms of like obviously helping the students, getting obviously everyone at Abertay, like they're so committed, they're so passionate to support the students as much as possible. But if you had to say like what's the best way, like what's your approach to teaching students? What's the things that you've realised have been like the main kind of go-to? Because I understand that it depends on the student, certain scenarios just depends. But if you had to say, like, is there like a certain way to teach a student, or like what's your perspective on that sort of question?
Teaching is, I think it's just such a complex thing. These days, it's not as simple as walking into a classroom and saying, "Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
Let's get started," and then delivering a software tutorial in which case, a YouTube video could replace me any day. Software tutorial is important, and of course, especially some of those hard fundamentals and some of those tricky bits that most people actually come to university without knowing. And you're like, okay, we got to get these covered. You got to do it in a way that's meaningful as well. A lot of the times, some of the problems and the barriers to a good higher education can be, they might be emotional or mental health barriers that somebody's trying to overcome, and the last thing they need is a lecturer or a teacher or a tutor that lambasts them for it, like, how dare you not know the thing that you don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, come on, people, can we not just even the playing field here a little bit? And so my approach to teaching is depending on what level I'm teaching at, is how I approach things. So first year is really all about open heart teaching, which is all about, I don't care where you come from. We all start life differently. We've all got different, places in which we start, and I want to create an equal playing field. So my job in first year is usually to bring everybody up to a certain standard, which is, I try to keep it, very achievable, which might frustrate some of the better students, as people that, have a little bit more experience. But they'll understand soon enough because, about 4 weeks into a program, that's when I start hitting home with the harder stuff.
Yep.
And actually, they may have rested on a laurel or two and end up finding that very difficult. But as the trick is always to kind of, create content that's, that brings people in, has a smooth learning curve, and eventually starts to raise the difficulty and the level of expectation. And so that's what I do with first year. It's a smoother curve. With second year, I basically take a more like, I'm going to assume now, being second year, that you have a certain level of experience with, whether it's 2D or 3D design, illustration, graphic novels, or maybe it's something like, modeling, lighting, UVing. And I'm going to go, okay, so one, let's have a smaller, shorter burst attempt to even any playing field stuff, like, because people come in at second year sometimes, so I don't know where they're coming from or what their background is.
Yep.
And so my first place is, maybe let's not care about where they're coming from, and instead try to get everybody to that same position where they're comfortable to kind of handle the content that I'm going to throw at them. And of course, as that goes on, you get several weeks into that program, and of course the difficulty curve ramps up maybe a little bit quicker than it did in first year. But I design around that. And of course in third year, which is probably that's where I met you in third year. Third year is much more about, who are you? What are you doing here? And how can I help you? And it's much more personal. And it's a more interpersonal relationship in terms of like getting to know you, what's holding you back, what your strengths are, and how on earth I can help you, help yourself ultimately. And and sometimes it's actually so little about the actual skill of a student, like, oh my God, you didn't teach me ZBrush today. And I went, no, I didn't. And I never could in one day. But there are about 1 million YouTube tutorials that will do a far better job than I ever could. But what I guarantee you the problem with your work is probably things like your work ethic, other things that are getting in the way of your, that are habitual, things that need to be discussed and talked about. And often there are issues of process, and like, it's how you're approaching things. Where are you getting your inspiration from? Have you thought about, your professional skills? So there's a myriad of different skills that are absolutely vital, and my role basically expands the more you go up that chain. And of course, getting to fourth year eventually, where it is much more about that direct one-to-one supervision about your project and your ambitions and how you're going to get into the industry that you're attracted to. So it's my teaching approach is essentially, pick a year and I'll tell you all about it. And it takes about an hour each, but and we call that's the science of pedagogy, which is about how we teach and why we teach. But I basically
The
use
slides.
oh yeah, I've got so many tools that I use these days. Like, and I think it's a great combination of interpersonal skills, being a relatable lecturer who's a little bit flawed, and I swear too often in classes, I'll be honest.
But that's what I like about you the most. Like you're like when it comes to like that's the thing that separates like you from a lot of other lecturers. And when it comes to like the whole idea of teaching, it's like obviously like you want to get that connection, you want to get that right balance between as long as like you're teaching like the craft, but as long as you're like teaching it in like a fun way and in like your way, and as long as like you're just being you, because at the end of the day, like we're all artists, we're all gamers, we're all into films and stuff, and it's all about being yourself, and that's what you come across so well in your class, in your teaching process, and it's trying to get in that across to like, so say for example there is people who are teachers or wanting to be a teacher and you're tuning in them right now. It's maybe if you you're trying to figure out how to get maybe or just how to teach better, just try to be more relaxed and just try and open up more, if you know what I mean, like do what Ryan does.
Well, yeah, I think it was. I think depending on, of course, what level I'm teaching at, it's how much more they get to see of me, and I think being in higher education, tutor or teacher, uh, my title's lecturer, so I always get conflicted between those three words, because a lecturer means that you dive in and out of several different roles, really. Whether it's research, teaching, and sometimes even just pastoral care, listening to someone and helping them out where it's appropriate. But for me, it's like they need to know as well, as a lecturer, I'm a practitioner as well. I know how hard this is. I've been through it. I get the self-doubt all the time, that shadow that follows all of us in different ways, and it's like, as a lecturer who works in the creative fields, I too have ran into mental health problems, and if other people can't talk about them, then I can be, an example for other people to look at and go, well, he's been through it and he got out the other side and it's all fine.
Yeah.
And of course have to do all this very carefully, but also kind of go like, I've also done bad work. I've handed work into clients I was utterly ashamed of, but I got paid and it was okay, and sometimes it's about learning that, sometimes, as a creative, our own worst enemy sometimes ourselves. We can be so cruel to our own abilities and we need to be our number one fan first and foremost. And I think there's a difficult handout stage that happens, and it largely seems to happen at university, which is, as a creative practitioner, someone growing up interested in the arts and design fields, your whole life, your friends and family would have been the ones who supported you and always told you, you're brilliant, you're fantastic, you can do this. And university, sometimes college, might be the first place where someone bumps into a wall, a grade wall that might even be, or someone like me who's like, what's this? This isn't good enough. Your work standard needs to be raised, and that can be quite a shock.
Yeah.
And there is that it's like one hand is letting go and another hand is stretching out, but it's slightly further away. But if you reach out and grab that hand, it will be utterly helpful and extremely useful to you. And my job is to try and get young creative artists and practitioners to just be more confident, to be more self-sustaining, to be independent creatives capable of going out into that world with a decent thickness of skin that will be, resilient to the kind of criticism you'll get outside of a university, which is infinitely, far harsher than the worst lecture I've ever met could ever give.
Right, this is scary. It feels like you've read my script. Like,
seriously?
Yeah, it's like, this guy's doing it all for me. This is brilliant. I don't have to say anything. This is awesome. It was literally sentence by sentence. I was like, that one's ticked, that one's ticked, that one's ticked. That was so good.
You know me, you just ask me a question, I'll talk forever.
Oh, that's what I love. That's brilliant. Because, wow, right, brilliant. Because there was a few kind of main points that you said there, and I was actually saying to you earlier about, so Ryan put out this really awesome tweet, and he pretty much covered one of the main topics out. There was like, well, two topics in there, and you kind of broke it down to kind of sections. It was basically like calculating your goals better, and then like the concept of self doubt, but it's around like what you said about what's the big rush, and you said obviously when it comes to calculating your goals, and obviously you have to obviously know what you want to do, and obviously you have to realize that you have to put in the time and show that you're passionate in that. And going back to Ryan's main point there, that sometimes it is how can I say it, difficult when somebody gives you the truth, because obviously if you're so used to getting told like you're really good in that, and then sometimes it can come as a shock. But there was like going to that kind of point there that you actually said in your tweet, like calculating your goals better. Do you think, like, what's your kind of perspective on that kind of on that tweet that you put out? Is there anything you'd like to raise regarding that?
Yeah, I think, that comes from I think that's always the voice of experience, which is I always believe in small steps, tiny little stepping stones will always get me across the river. That's
Mm-hmm.
a really important way to think. And I think sometimes, for whatever reason, we believe you can jump over the river and be as good as the person who took the small steps across. And I've learned the hard way over the years that you just simply can't do that.
Yeah.
But if we compare ourselves to the people that may have done that and gotten away with it, then we think it's totally achievable. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not. You've got to learn yourself. Who are you and how do you learn best? And I'm somebody that's learned everything by mistake. I throw myself at the wall and then I'm like, oh, that hurt. Better not throw myself at a wall then.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like it's I guess there's a huge theme underneath so many things, which is this idea about how we set expectations. And I think that's a very cultural thing at the minute. That's not just education. It's ourselves, and it's like it's of services. It's as customers. It's as people. It's what certain things should do for us. And I think the worst, of course, is of ourselves. And I think it's like if you're a learner, if you're new to this field, guess what? There is no quick fix other than hard work, patience, trial and error, getting things wrong, celebrating the successes, and moving forward
Yeah.
and challenging yourself in an ever increasing ways. But I think a lot of the time, it's the frustration can be, as see it a lot more so in my second year group, which is I want to be a concept artist, and I'm like, well, totally fine. But that's going to be that's a year's worth of progress that really takes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, some people get there quicker than others, and that's totally fine. Don't compare
Definitely.
yourself to them. But there are fundamentals that have to be covered, and if you try to skip them, then you're going to run into brick walls. And so it's like you've got to try and sell that message. But of course, no one believes the message until they finally run into the brick wall. Then it's
Completely agree.
I should have listened. And I went, but there's no satisfaction in that. Sometimes there's the impression that you might be smug. I told you so.
Yeah.
But that's not how it works to me. It's like, I was trying to warn you because I know how that feels. Trust me when I say this. Get the fundamentals right. Your line work, your perspective, your tones, your values. Or we go to 3D and says, make sure you know how to poly model. Make sure you know how to UV. Make sure you know how to light a basic scene. Make some renders. Some people just want to go straight to ZBrush and they want to get in there and they just want to go crazy with the polys, and then it's like, there's some stages they've skipped along the way that will just haunt them for days. And
Yeah.
I'm like, it says be careful.
You have to like trust it.
I think it's like learn the rules before you go around breaking them. That's what I've
Mm-hmm.
always said.
Awesome.
But you can apply that to any visual context, right? And I think it's just about fundamentals,
Of course.
principles, and then of course good practices and processes. And then once you get confident and quick, then throw in all the hacks and cheats and side steps that help you get things done. Production is of course a very different beast because a lot of the time it's smoke and mirrors. But as long as you know the hard fundamentals, you're going to be fine.
So, yeah, like everyone who's like tuning in, you have to realize like that like he's made like so many key points there, and these points are like questions that or like discussions that you hear students saying all the time, in the sense that like they'll always want to ask themselves like, why am I not getting anywhere? Yet they already know the answer, but it's accepting the fact to you have to learn and be patient with it. And so many people think that they can skip hard work and stuff, and at the end of the day, it's like you just have to obviously show you're passionate, enjoy it, and that, and take the time to do the craft. But most importantly, just love making the craft, and naturally through time you'll just get good at it. And like there's obviously like so many important things that obviously we've talked about. We've also talked about the self doubt stuff as well. There's one interesting question I actually wanted to talk about, because obviously the whole podcast is obviously around student education, but obviously I want to talk about like the teaching side of things. I'm not sure how you'd approach answering this question, but I was just wondering, like, how do universities recruit teachers? Like, what do they kind of need to know, or like, is there anything that you're allowed to say in regards to or like, what do you think makes a good teacher?
Well, I think it's universities don't recruit teachers per se; they recruit lecturing
Lecturers,
staff.
sorry. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes they'll recruit, like sort of classroom assistants or teaching fellows. Teaching fellows is kind of more of a common word, which is like someone who's brought in with a very specific skill set that will complement maybe a module or a set of classes because of those particular skills. And it's actually a very interesting and actually kind of a really good opportunity if you ever see them coming up for people that are interested. If you're ever looking to break into the education industry, which I always have to be clear about. I talk about education just because I am from the education industry. Now we do overlap slightly, of course, with that entertainment/games industry, but more importantly, it's my knowledge base definitely is education at this stage. I've been in it for so long now.
Yeah.
But in terms of recruitment, now universities have to hire academics. So they're people that that are both they're practically invested, so they have a skill set. And of course, even part of my interview for the role, my portfolio was assessed as much as my credentials as an academic and the qualifications that I held. The other part is, of course, research. Lecturers, at sort of even like lecturing stage and above, lecturer, senior lecturer, and going on to something much higher than that. They're all people with an investment in research, okay, which is, of course, that ability, let's ignore the funding side of research, but it's the ability to kind of independently go after knowledge. To find that knowledge and to kind of make that knowledge make sense, in whether that's writing papers or making an art gallery, creating new works of art that explore themes and topics that have been well documented. And of course, increasingly within our staff body, we're taking more and more practice-led researchers on, which is not necessarily researchers who write books, chapters, and papers, but more so sort of lecturers who curate galleries or put work in galleries or create exhibitions, and that's really, really important, and that's really, really cool. It's really valuable. So it's a dual role in very basic terms. One part's their ability to do and make stuff, and the other part's the ability to research and create new knowledge.
Do you think with so obviously everyone I've talked on the podcast, there's a common kind of point always being raised, and it's obviously making sure that all the universities are up to date to industry standards and stuff. And it gets so hard, like this. So this is the thing. This is why I always take the lecturer's side in this point, in this sort of discussion, because I think it's when students have to realise that a lecturer can only know so much. There's you have to realise that, like, for example, when I was in Abertay, like, I'm not sure in comparison to a lot of other universities, like, probably, like, we're probably quite well size, like some of our classes, the classes, like, there's a lot of people in the year, but it depends. Like, for example, bigger the country, the bigger the classes and that. But there's only so much you guys can know. So it's like trying to figure out how you, obviously, like, going back to a point that you said earlier, like, how do universities as a whole bridge the gap in regards to how do they do like a 70% practical and 30% written? Because obviously, when it comes to actually getting the job, it's literally the practical that only counts, to be honest.
It depends. Like, there's probably a few things to discuss in there which are really, really important. But just on the last point, I think it's what is the component that you might expect at a university such as ours, and of course there are other universities that do similar courses. But for us, the computer arts program has always succeeded, largely because of its ability to kind of keep it relatively general and let students decide what specialism within inside that program they want to handle.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we've made some huge changes there, which are quite exciting. But for us, it's like, the main point should be practical work. So, for instance, we don't do exams. We don't believe in exams in computer arts. What's the point in that?
Yeah.
But as a university, as an academic institution, we must always have some form of written component, which is we need to be developing people as intellectuals in the world as well. So But what we do believe, though, is that the act of creating artworks and design works is knowledge creation. It is intelligence building. It's stuff that forces people to think in creative and process-led forms and modes. And of course, that really does translate into, like, what that final session is with us in fourth year, which is a dissertation. And time again, as I say, some of the biggest compliments we get from industry is actually how well our students interview. And that's largely down to the dissertation, because they really, really know their stuff. And of course, that dissertation isn't some random essay that might be related to your work. It's an essay completely related to your work. It's about how you worked and how you set out to achieve the goals that you did and how you've evaluated those goals. And of course, that creates a really excellent case study that most people, when it comes to the interview stage, means that they can talk in a very informed intellectual position about their artwork and how they made it. And that's what really blows my mind every year. That's why I love it.
Yeah.
So again, but we do believe firmly, though, and just trying to make that clear as possible, it's got to be about the practical work.
Yep.
But the written component being, such a small component in the overall experience, will just always feel it'll always feel difficult because you're actually doing quite little of it. But and if we were saying, well, maybe we need to do more, then of course everyone's arms go up. No, 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 like,
no,
okay, we're listening. So it's like, yeah, we do expect a written component, but it tends to be quite a small portion of the actual program.
Yeah, like just for everyone to know, by the way, like obviously, so I went to Abertay University, and going back to like the first thing I said at the start. Like, if you're in Scotland and you listen to the podcast, please go to Abertay. It's like, I'm not just saying that just because Ryan's on the podcast. I've said it throughout the podcast. Abertay to me was amazing, and especially like for me as a 3D artist, it was so good. Like, I highly recommend. Like, so even if you're in England or abroad, people who are wanting to come from other countries, highly recommend you to check it out. It's amazing university filled with so many people. With so many different backgrounds, and like Ryan was saying, like there's so much there's so much things up to grabs for you guys to utilize and make the most of. And just check the links. I'll put anything in the description below, as always, so make sure to check that. So kind of carrying on, similar kind of topic, but is there anything that you think you'd like to see changing now in universities and colleges? Is there anything you think you're still universities are still lacking? Like, what's that kind of thing that you think, right, we're definitely not there yet? Is there anything that kind of stands out?
I think there's like it's that old adage that universities sometimes move slower than they should, and they're often very reactionary to, of course, the changes that we see in industry. And we've taken a lot of steps in the last year and a half to kind of be a little bit more ahead of the curve than we would normally be. But we also have to be careful because, universities, they're fundamentally democratic, which means that, I can't walk into a room and go, it should be this way, make it this way. It has to be an agreement across quite a large body of staff now. We've hired 10, actually, since you were here, 15 more staff in our division alone.
Really? Wait,
Yeah.
I need to come back and have a look.
Oh, not just computer arts. That's across the division of arts and games, and of course of maths and technology as well. So we've got new arts lecturers. A really great fellow who's just joined us called Finley, who is probably gonna. I really wish you two meet, actually, because he's just one of the best 3D artists I've ever met. He's fantastic. But so the university's role ultimately is to hire the right people and to make sure there's enough of the right people to make the institute viable, right? Which is, of course, our programs. And our programs, which cover a large varied basis of subjects, whether it's illustration, drawing, concept art, animation, technical arts, 3D design, graphics, rendering, digital media concepts. It's a lot we're trying to cover. So essentially, it's our job as a university to make sure we got the right people in place. Mm-hmm. And the hardest thing actually is attracting industry to come and work at a university. Yeah. So that's something the university needs to get better at, not industry. So, for instance, we were hiring. I'm pretty sure this isn't oversharing. And if it is, I'm in so much trouble. But
you can just let me know, and I'll delete. I'll be like instant deleted.
And I'd rather ask for forgiveness. But just like say we're trying to hire, some 3D positions, right?
Hmm.
You see my kind of spam over the summer about that.
Yep.
We actually got one, but we actually had two roles to fill, and the applications and getting good quality applications is just difficult. Making it, please leave industry and come work here. And they're like, what? Work in education? But I might enjoy, there might be salaries we can't compete with, or there might be location issues we can't compete with, or there might be, access issues that we can't compete with, and it's the only time that a university and education industry will have to compete with a games industry or an entertainment industry. So that's always an interesting insight. So,
Hmm.
but I think I think most universities, they have that same tension. We're all fighting for the same talent after all. So that's the one time, where sort of universities, like, they have to really kind of up their game and show their teeth. And luckily, I think we've got an excellent, incredible body of staff at the minute, and going to work every day at the minute is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, in terms of just, like, what they're capable of themselves as staff members, never mind the kind of effect they're having on how we teach and how we deliver our programs. So I'm really, really excited. I think it's an exciting time at Abertay for us, and I think there's been some updates that I've wanted to see for many years that have finally kind of come to fruition. There's been a lot of hard-won fights to kind of fix things. White space is gone, by the way.
Wait,
It's been
what?
yeah. So white space, which is one of our main sort of development areas, has been had a complete refit.
I'm
Um,
disappointed.
oh, it's good. It's a good
Oh,
refit.
right, okay, okay.
So where white space used to be is actually so MProfs have kind of moved into there, and it looks good. But alongside that are these two massive new sort of development labs. So, like, gone are some of the small 20 ones, and we went for something like 40 seaters, just so we
What?
could teach bigger, better classes on
Nice.
industry standard equipment. And of course, the upstairs area is pretty much still the same. It'll look familiar to you. And of course, the undergrads have now got their own undergraduate development studio, which is a 60 PC development studio they can use any time that it's free, which is great.
Now that's cool.
So that's a combination of students raising their voice, of staff raising their voice, and making ourselves heard, and that's the sort of improvement that I think we all wanted to see, and it's really, really having an impact.
Hmm.
We just had an open day there, and Ross, man, open days used to be one of those things I dreaded because, despite being I quite perform for my lectures, I like that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's just something really strange about talking to people's parents, and I'm like, oh hi, yeah.
Wait, you think? Oh, well, again, I'm one of those people who
It's
talk to everyone.
crazy.
I don't know.
Totally, but it's fine. I actually really enjoy it in the end. What was great. It's such a buzz in these open days, just
Yeah.
because the new spaces look great. Everything's painted. It's fresh. It looks new. White space towards the end of its days was looking a little bit yellow. I was
Yeah.
like, but
A bit dull.
it was the success of our school and of our students that really made all of this possible. And so, like, a big thanks goes to the students for this. They
Hmm.
help us kind of make us better, and that's really, really important.
Yeah.
They keep us on our toes, and of course, I think that's how we're always as long as we're open, as long as our ears are open and our hearts are open, we're gonna make things better. And we always do.
Nice. Because, like, you said, so before I got two more points after this, and then, but I just want to say one thing about the open day. So, my last year in Abertay, so my fourth year, I got asked to kind of show my artwork and so forth, and talk about my process and what happens at Abertay to obviously the future students and so forth and their parents. But the coolest thing that ever happened, there was this a wee boy, he was probably 5, and he was with his dad and his older sister, and his sister was obviously applying to the course for computer arts. But the wee boy just ran over to me and he was like, "Sci-fi! I seen the film The Martian. You made the Martian piece. Talk to
Oh,
me."
that's awesome.
It was so cool. It's like the wee boy was just geeking out about art, and he was like, "To tell me everything about sci-fi that you love." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, here we go! Great conversation time." And
Well,
then
my young friend,
I know.
spaceships.
Oh, it was so fun.
Oh
Cause
man, I was laughing my head off because, like, I was just doing one of my speeches and I was showing it was this student who was interested plus their parents, and the parents were like, "Can we do this course?" and,
brilliant. That's what I'm
and, it,
talking about.
and it was great, and the dad was like, "I'd love to take you out for a pint, man." I was like, "Calm down now." So it's like it's just let's see how junior gets in here first, and see,
Yep.
see their skills and all that. And most of the open day isn't so much about them seeing the spaces. They just kind of want to meet who's going to teach their children, which I think that's important.
Hmm.
Um, and I think going to university these days is a slightly riskier move than it used to be, and it's easier to kind of overlook that sometimes, and because the I get the risks are higher. You want to take 4 years of your life to go in somewhere and study. And I'm like, yeah, you better make sure you get it right. So
Yeah.
come in, talk to us, talk to the lecturer, see the spaces, and make sure it's up to scratch. So that's what I like about it. But I'm at that point where it's just really entertaining. It's getting parents are as equally interested in the course as kids. You're like, this is great. So maybe we need to start running some sort of adult night classes or something.
You know the answer to that, man. It's game jams. Continue the game jams, and you're sorted.
Ah,
But
the eponymous game jam.
before we, because the pot, we'll save the game jam question right to the end. But because we're literally like rolling with the scripts, it's going so perfect. I love it. So when it comes to actually, how can I say it? The word isn't recruiting. When it comes to accepting students from secondary schools' work, how does that get critiqued? Like, how does that get marked? Like, how do you get accepted into uni?
Well, of course, the UCAS application system is how most university applications are done, but there is one caveat with ours, which is it's 50% component is a portfolio, so you have to present your actual practical work to us, which was we fought for that to kind of make a return. I think there was a point years ago where it had vanished for some reason, and we were like, oh no 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 no, we need to see the work.
Yeah.
But so essentially everyone who wants to apply to Abertay has to present a portfolio of 10 pages of work, and in those 10 pages they can present their best items, and of course they can take one page to maybe show lots of different items such as visual research, maybe some of the inspiration, some of the process that led them to their final piece. And it's all pretty self-explanatory,
Yeah.
but it's a point of great anxiety for a lot of people, and it's like, what should be in there? And I'm like, well, if it's first year, I just want to know that you care. Can you put pen or pencil to paper, or a Wacom pen to a Wacom tablet, for all I care?
Yeah.
And are you a creative person? Do you want to do this? Should you be here? Those are important questions. And it's like, and I think the biggest one of all is simply that one of caring. Do you care? And if that comes across in the portfolio, even if the work can sometimes be a little kind of like amateur, and it's supposed to be, these are learners, then of course then like you pass the test. But there are some applications, honestly, every year I'm like, oh, you don't care.
Yeah.
Like you've got 10 pages to present yourself, and they produce two or three, and you're like, no, 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 come on. This is you're a way to go to university. This is it's big person school. This has got to be somewhere where you're about to join a class full of people who will care about this subject, and you've got to fit in.
Hmm.
And so I'm certainly not interested in people who don't want to be there, because it's a mistake. It costs them money. It costs us money, and it's no one really wins in that scenario. And of course, I don't want anyone being there by mistake. It's like, actually, you probably should be on a fashion design course. Totally fine. Absolutely love fashion design, and go and do it. Do your thing, do it really well. And so it's just making sure that we vet people the right way, and that we get the right people into the building. And luckily, when it comes to things like the subject of games and films and animation, people are pretty passionate, so it's usually quite easy to tell the difference.
Nice. I just really wanted to get that question answered, because it was one that I've been wanting to get answered for a long time. Like, I've always noted down certain questions that I felt like would be great to kind of get answered on the podcast, because obviously the main thing is obviously the education side of things, and I don't know why I never really thought about it until I think it was only about halfway through, so probably the 30 episode mark maybe. I was like,
Mhm.
wait, why have I not even got this question answered? But then I realised it was about getting a proper lecturer on to actually get like that perspective. Um,
Mhm.
Thank you so much for saying that. So we'll leave the podcast on a really fun one. So as always, we all know Abertay is all about the game jams and the game jam life. Just tell us a wee bit about game jams, and it'd be great to hear your perspective, and specifically on around maybe around the topic of artists becoming more innovative.
Ah, so game jams. You know my position in this. I think they're bloody brilliant, for lack
Yep.
of a better phrase. And they become, a kind of Swiss Army tool in many ways. A perfect multifaceted application that solves a lot of particular problems, creates a lot of different challenges, and allows people to kind of really explore, their capability and how they act in small doses in ways that are, efficient, challenging, and can build confidence. And so I'm a big fan of game jams, but I'm a fan of jams of any kind, so whether that is, if it's five people picking up instruments and jamming out some new songs,
Yeah.
it's the same theme. It's that idea that there's a spontaneity to things, and spontaneity is something that can go missing in the educational institutions around the world, which is, right, okay, for the next 2 days, we're going to go make something. Oh, what we going to make, sir? I don't know. Being a game jam, I hope it's something playable,
Yeah.
and but it's about trying to upset the normal rhythm of, it's Monday morning, come in for your lecture, and then we'll have a class.
Yeah.
And then, that has a rhythm to it and a reliability to it that isn't really real. And of course, more and more people these days, they're craving that production experience. Now, no, I'm not saying game jams are a replacement for the experience of being on a live production, certainly not. But they at least emulate the craziness of having to think on your feet in short periods of time on much shorter deadlines. Which kind of refers to a previous question. You're like, how, what does university need to change? And I'm like, well, there's certain things that can't change about universities because they are, they're very different to industry in many ways, because they're trying to look after students, they're trying to have certain deadlines set at the end of semesters where things are meant to be due. But for instance, if I set a short deadline for 70 people, then that means there's 70 pieces of work I've got to mark next week, which would wipe my week out.
Yeah.
So we tend to have these, like, deadlines that are set at the end of semesters. Now, if anyone who works in production, they'll know that's not very realistic. Says, deadlines are much more common than that. And what game jams do is, for a short period of time, let people experience what a short deadline's really like and work into that. But of course, I think there's all sorts of factors we have to be aware of there. And you'll know my position on this because I've tried to make it clear as possible before. But I don't like these all-night game jams, that 48-hour ones.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a go home, sleep, and go home and wash type of person. You will be far more productive after a good sleep and a good shower every time. And I think years ago when we first, and I was me and Ian Donald who pretty much kicked off that kind of game jam craze at Abertay. Of course, the students mostly did all the work, of course, but we made a couple of errors along the way, which was like, the first couple of game jams, we were like, yeah, 48 hours, let's go. And we had people coming in pajamas, bringing their sleeping bags and working all through the night and tanking, tins of Monster, whatever it might be. And I'm like, guys, I'm not sure I like this.
Yeah.
Certainly didn't like the smell it made in the room.
Oh god. The pizzas as well.
Oh, the cheese mists, man. So, what we eventually we noticed as well as staff, because we would participate, our game jams were, it was students, it was local industry, we had people coming up from parts of England to come to our game jams to become that famous.
Yep.
And of course, some academics were taking place too. They were like, this is a good chance for me to do something. So they became this big, a 2-day hive of activity using both of our floors and all of our computers. And we're like, this is actually really great. But we felt terrible for at least a week after it. And I was like, I can't function like that. So we're doing something wrong here and we're going to cut it out. Also, it's a little bit too much like really bad crunch. And that's something that we just wanted to nip in the bud straight away.
Mm-hmm.
So we just took a hard stance afterwards, kind of going, right, from this point onwards, says we're not going to support that idea of 48-hour game jams in terms of you can go straight through. Says, no, we're not people's parents. We can't go to their homes and tell them what to do. Says, but we certainly on our land and our ground in our building, we can go, look, people, That's it. It's 10 o'clock at night. Please go home, get some sleep. We'll see you tomorrow for a pastry and a coffee. And it's about caring about the students even when they don't know you're caring. And
Yeah.
some of them really, very few of them have resisted. And that's to their credit. Students are really quite open-minded to this stuff. They want to be healthy too.
Yeah.
And very rarely do you get someone who's like, no, I want to work forever. You know,
I
it's
better
such
not
a
say anything then.
Yep, exactly, Ross. I know what you're like.
Don't listen to
So,
me. I'm a bad
uh,
example.
and but but my point earlier too as well was is like it's got to be your choice, and as long as you know that people with those that caring responsibility,
Hmm.
that investment, it's in that level above you, as long as they're looking at you and going, look, is everything all right? Then you're fine. At least you know someone else cares and that they're at least taking an interest. But now and again, it's okay to listen to someone when they say, right, you go home,
Yep.
your eyes are hanging out of your head. And the amount of times I think, even thinking back to my students towards fourth year who were, by their own choice, were doing these mad all-nighters that were increasing their levels of stress and anxiety, not helping them.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, you're going to wake up the next day and you're not going to function. And the work that you thought you were going to get done won't happen, and you'll be further behind. So please don't do it.
Yep.
Look after yourself, and you will look after the rest of the work when you're in a better, healthier state of mind and place. And so I said I've had students show up for their honors meetings, and I went, "Are you okay?" Yeah, it's just been up all night doing this work. And I went, right, okay, right, this meeting's not happening. I'm ordering you to go home and have a good sleep. I want you to watch a Disney film, have a cup of cocoa, and please be nice to yourself. And they're like,
Yeah.
what? You're actually ordering that? And I went, yeah, I am. And also, I want a small review of that Disney film tomorrow. you know, I want
Even
to how good
better.
I want to know how good the cocoa was. And they came in the next day, and I was like, look, we've rescheduled this meeting. How are you feeling? And I went, so much better. Thank you. That's
Pocahontas
not
was awesome.
exactly. It's not until you're on the other side of it sometimes you're like, that was the right move, because we've all got very active kind of. Our brains are so internal, and well, they just are internal. What a strange statement to make. But like the
Just roll
thought
with it. Just roll with it.
is the busyness and the layers of thoughts all kicking off at once. Like a
Mhm.
creative that creative explosion is sometimes hard to contain, especially if it's happening at night. And I'm like, look, you just need to write this down and get to sleep. It'll be so much better for you.
Yeah.
But I don't want to preach about it because it's really up to people how they live their lives. But I think as far as a university and as a lecturing staff member, I'm like, please don't make yourself sick in front of me. I
Yeah.
will step in and I will tell you to go home.
Yeah.
So anyway, our game jams, just more to the point, just became like actually a lot better, a lot more attractive to people. Actually, once we dropped that all-nighter kind of component, and I'm very little, I'm nothing really to do with our game jams anymore, which is a great place to be because people got so invested in like the Abertay Game Development Society really took over that lately, and they're really running with it. Some of the creative jams that we've run along the way have been run by people like Claire Brennan, who has done really arty game jams, like putting them in galleries and in museums. And of course, like Lynn, Robin, Dana, with all just between us, there's just been
Yeah.
some really crazy and exciting game jams along the way, exploring game making as much as the games that are being made. And I think that's really interesting to me. So the game jams became this little microcosm, a petri dish of how we might explore industry cultures, industry practices, even a place where you can experiment a better version of the industry. And I like that. Like the all women's game jam that happened. I was like, yes, absolutely. And
Amazing.
just to see what came out of that, I'm really big support of it. And then you've got people like a big shout out to Stephen Tarland, who he started the Rainbow Game Jams, which were game jams that were just about LGBT people,
Yeah.
LGBT plus taking part in game jams and making games that were about their stories and their
Perfect.
interests and things they wanted to make. I'm like, that to me is the success of game jams. It became a new mode of practice for game makers, especially students. It's something they can engage with that is it's malleable, it's flexible, it's something that can be deployed easily, and you don't need a university to do it, but it's great if they can support it. You don't need a lecturer to do it. Great if they can support it, and you don't even need industry to do it, but it's great if they can support it. And so we were a big fan of it. And it was that year that Future Lab, a company based in Brighton,
I
had come
saw
up.
that. That was amazing.
Awesome, man. And like, and we've had a great relationship with them ever since. So, like it's about when you get those little bits of, when it really kicks off, it's
Hmm.
students working with academics, working with industry, and magic happens every time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that because oh, by the way, that's one thing I'll promise, right? So that's my goal for this year or next year. Let me know when the next game jam is, and I'll be there. Okay? That
Okay.
I will definitely be there.
Yeah.
That's I need to kind of give it a go because of all the years I was at Abertay, I was like, I just didn't, I was too busy working. Like going back to one of the main points that Ryan just made when I was at university, I just worked all the time, and it eats away at you, and that's like the like I don't like regret kind of anything in terms of like my decision making. But when I was at uni, obviously like I was so focused in doing the craft and trying to master things, and I prioritized grades too much. I overthought it, but when it came to like the other side of things, like the social aspect, enjoy it, make the most of it, and appreciate it because there's so many great things that university have available for you guys to utilize, and most importantly, just have fun being around the type of people that you want to be surrounded by. But thanks so much for saying all that, Ryan, and thank you once again for coming on.
No problem, Ross. It's a total pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's just that, like, that's the thing is, like, when it comes to the podcast, it's always been about, like I said it right at the start. Like, I've had so many people on the podcast that have said their perspective from being a student, and it's getting across all of information that I guess maybe they're unaware of, and too many people like to complain about certain things. Like they always say, "Why do we not have this? Why don't we have this?" And this podcast obviously is designed to kind of answer these questions, like these common questions that students ask all the time, and particularly the great point that you said about like teachers keeping up to date and stuff, because it's such a hard one for everyone to kind of for all these lecturers to keep up to date with. And once everyone who's tuning in, you realise what happens on a daily basis being a lecturer. You can now obviously I hope you guys respect your lecturers and appreciate what they do for you. But as always, folks, make sure to give Ryan a follow. His Twitter will be in the description below. If you have any questions, as always, I'm always happy to help. Just put a question in the comment section, and if you're tuning in on other platforms as well, it should also let you write or attach a comment. And you can also send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'll do my best to get back to you. But before we finish the podcast, is there anything else you want to say? There's no pressure. Just wondering if anything else comes. It's just a random one I like to sometimes throw out.
Yeah, I thought that was a great way to wrap up the podcast. And I'll say just in closing as well is that, remember, students need their lecturers and lecturers need their students. So remember,
Yep.
always hold us to a high standard as well, and we'll hold you to a high standard back. And that's how the relationship works. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But remember as well, the best part about education, especially like a university or a college, is that you're in a class full of people that love what they do. They love the subject area. So talk to them as well. Form these groups on these communities and just be there for each other. All right?
Awesome. Thank you once again, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for now.
Thanks again, Ross.